Hey, what an incredible night Friday night was. Night to shine. I've told you, and I still believe it. I believe it more today than ever before. It's the best night of the year here at E-Free Church. If you've been here, you know that's the case. And there was so much energy down at that gym when we had the crowning ceremony and the confetti poppers and the balloons falling, and it was just amazing. I love Night to Shine for several reasons. I love it, number one, because getting just to watch the expressions on the faces of our honored guests, some 270 of them that were here. There were 622 churches that did Night to Shine worldwide, over 100,000 special guests. For us to be part is pretty amazing. I get to stand at the door and just greet every one of them as they arrive. One dad said to me, "I'm so glad it's 6 o'clock because my son insisted on getting dressed for this at 9 o'clock this morning." And but they look forward to it, that expression. If you get a chance, go to our church Facebook page. Go back and scroll through the pictures. It's the expressions on their faces that make it all worth it. We get to communicate to them. We love you. God loves you. You are valuable. I love that part of it. I love, secondly, because I don't think there's an event we do all year long in which more people serve together than Night to Shine. Hundreds of you served at Night to Shine. And I think I enjoyed going around and watching you. To me, the highlight of the night was seeing so many E-Free Church people out on the dance floor with their buddies. I saw people from this church out on the dance floor that I didn't think I'd see on the dance floor in a million years. I'm sure hell froze over Friday night, okay? It was so cool to watch our people serve and just loving on these individuals. That's cool. And the third thing is the way it connects us to the community. Because it's not just an E-Free event. Yes, we host it. We kind of orchestrate it. But there are many other businesses that participate, churches that participate, and we have people that come and help us volunteer. We have a lot of people help us that aren't even believers in Jesus yet. And it's a great opportunity to connect with them as well and for them to see what E-Free Church is all about. So for all those reasons and so much more, it is an exciting event. Every year, it's the Friday before Valentine's Day. Go ahead and put it on your calendar. And if you have never served at Night to Shine, make sure you do it next year. Of course, if you served, I don't have to ask you to sign up. You'll want to sign up because you don't want to miss an event like this. Now, we also, part of our vision as a church is to start a new campus. And 2 in-gatherings ago, 2 Novembers ago, in our in-gathering project, we raised the seed money to be able to get going on that. And the strategy, the timeline included that in 2022, we would officially decide on the location. We did a lot of meet and greets, a lot of discussion, a lot of prayer. And I told you several months ago, we narrowed it down to 3 areas. 3 cities, Alpena, Cadillac, and Traverse City is what we narrowed it down to. And now we're maybe about 5 weeks behind schedule because we were supposed to have this done by the end of 2022. But at our last elder board meeting, we officially approved the location of our next campus. One of those 3, Alpena, Cadillac, Traverse City. And I'm going to officially announce that next Sunday. Okay? And I'm not allowed to tell you today what city it is. I can tell you it's not Cadillac, it's not Traverse City, but I cannot tell you which one it is. I'll officially announce that next Sunday. But we are absolutely thrilled about that. And part of the strategy we want to use is the possibility of next year not only having a Night to Shine here, but having a Night to Shine at the new location as well. So we're excited about all that might happen. Keep praying about that. We'll talk more about that in the weeks and months to come. Well, open your Bibles, please, to Daniel chapter 6. Power up your devices if you're using a device. And today, we're going to complete our 10-week journey through the first 6 chapters of the book of Daniel. And last week we started that riveting story of Daniel in the lion's den, and we're going to end that story today. Now, before we jump right into it, though, I want to caution us because there are two extremes when it comes to how we interpret this story. Now, let me first begin with this. My guess is most of you know how the story ends. If you don't know how the story ends, little spoiler alert, Daniel survives, okay? But as we look at this, there's two ways we can interpret it. One I would call liberalism, one I would call mysticism. And I think both are dangerous. So first of all, there's the liberalism side, and there are many liberal scholars who want to explain away all the supernatural elements in the Bible because they believe there are no miracles. There are no angels, things of that nature. And they want to explain it all away. And as I read and studied, I also read and studied some of the liberal theologians and how they would explain this, because we're going to see in the text, the Bible says God sent an angel to shut the mouths of the lions. Well, the liberal theologians can't accept that. They believe there has to be a natural explanation for how Daniel survived. And so some of the ones they give, the reasons they give, the explanations, the theories are kind of interesting. One theologian, he said, well, you have to understand that all of these lions, they weren't hungry. They weren't hungry. That's why Daniel survived. The lions weren't hungry. Now put aside the fact that history tells us that because the lion's den was a chief way of execution in the Medo-Persian Empire, what they would do is they would keep the lions hungry, right? So put that aside. Think about it this way. How many of you have a dog? Raise your hand. See, I know you don't have cats because Christians don't have cats. We know that, right? This story proves it, because when the heathen king wanted to punish people, what did he do? He put them in a pit with a bunch of big cats, right? Okay, so anyway, if you have a dog, though, let me ask you this question. No matter how much your dog, and I've lost several of you, no matter how much your dog eats, if you pull out a snack, what does your dog want? I've never seen a dog turn it down. Have you? I've never seen a dog not interested. To tell me that these lions just weren't hungry? Give me a break. Another one said this. Well, what happened was the lions were asleep. When Daniel entered the den, they're asleep, and they slept the whole night. They didn't know he was even there. And now suddenly the theme song to Daniel 6 becomes, in the jungle, the mighty jungle, the lion sleeps tonight. To think they were asleep, really? Or one theologian said, Daniel, whom he's able to go hide in a crevice or hide under some hay, and they didn't know he was there. So the lions must have been blind. They didn't see him enter the den. They must have been deaf. They didn't hear any of the commotion, and they must have had no smell, right? I mean, you fire up and cook a steak, hide it in my living room, I will find it, right? They didn't smell him? Come on. And then the one theologian actually said this. He said, well, it was just one lion. And it was a really old lion. And Daniel was able to elude the lion the whole night. Folks, this lion was not Clarence the cross-eyed lion. That's not who's in the pit. Daniel was some 85 years old. Can you imagine him eluding a lion all night? The truth of the matter is, folks, I really do believe it takes a whole lot more faith to explain away the miracle than to believe that the God who created the world delivered Daniel. So we want to avoid the side of liberalism. But there's also another dangerous side. It's the side of mysticism. And I listened to many sermons this week where they said this. The main teaching of Daniel and the lion's den is this. Daniel represents us. The lion's den represents any trial we go through. And if we just have enough faith, God will always deliver us. Now, folks, that makes for preaching that fills auditoriums. But it's also preaching that's bad theology. To say that this story teaches if you have enough faith, God will deliver you from any trial you go into does not fit Scripture. If that's the case, God owes some people some really big apologies. Isaiah had faith. He got sawn in two. Peter had faith. He believed. He was crucified upside down. Paul, no one would argue that he lacked faith, but he was beheaded. And to say that the story of Daniel in the lion's den is to teach us that as long as you have enough faith, God will always deliver you, does not match the whole of Scripture. Now, many times, and I heard preachers do that this week, that when they look at this and they have that view, that slant, they usually use one verse in the New Testament that they think proves it. And the verse says that Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And that is a true statement. But folks, that verse is talking about his character. He always was God. He is God. He always will be God. He always was holy. He is holy. He always will be holy. He always was faithful. He is faithful. He always will be faithful. That verse is not teaching that all the events you see in the Old Testament are patterns of how God always works. It's not teaching that. Folks, if you really believe that, then anytime you pass a farm that has a donkey, you probably ought to stop the car and go listen for God to speak to you through the donkey. Because he did that in the Old Testament. If you really believe that, then every time you pass a bush, you better put on some sunglasses because the bush is about to catch on fire and God's going to speak to you out of it because he did in the Old Testament. And don't worry if the ferry's late. Just step into the water. God will part it. He did that for Moses. And you never have to wear a life jacket again because if you go under, a fish will swallow you like happened with Jonah. Folks, those stories are not teaching that the pattern of God is always the same. It's teaching that the person of God is always the same. You see, the main thrust of Daniel 6 is not teaching us that if you believe, God will always deliver you. The truth of this story is this: God can deliver you, no doubt. But you don't trust God because of what you hope he will do. You trust God because you know who he is. Now let me say that again. That's important. You don't trust God because you hope he'll do something. You trust God because you know who he is. And if you know who he is, you will always be willing to accept whatever he does. If Daniel had not been delivered from the lion's den, would that have meant that God was not faithful? Well, not at all. If the lions had eaten Daniel, what would have happened to Daniel? He would have went immediately to heaven. That's a faithful God right there. Daniel 6 is not teaching us that as long as you believe, God will deliver you from every trial. Daniel 6 is teaching us that God can deliver us, but instead of trusting in what we hope God will do, we need instead to trust in who God is, because he's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And when we trust who he is, we'll be willing to accept whatever he does. That's the main teaching of Daniel 6. So we saw last week that it all started with the promotion of Daniel. King Darius, the new Medo-Persian king, is about to promote Daniel to prime minister. And I told you last week that whenever you get elevated, you will also be targeted. And so he now has enemies who want to take him down. And so they come up with a plot against Daniel. They try to find dirt on him. They can't. So instead, they do a plot because they know if they can make Daniel choose between his God and his king, he will always choose his God. So they flatter the king and convince the king to pass a law that for 30 days, no one is allowed to pray to anyone except the king, because they know Daniel will not do that. And the penalty is, if you pray to anyone except the king, you will be thrown into the lion's den. The king signs the law. And what does Daniel do? He prays. He prays. And that now is going to bring us to the next point. We've seen the promotion of Daniel, the plot of Daniel, the prayer of Daniel. Now we see the protection of Daniel. And we pick up the story beginning in verse number 12 of Daniel chapter 6. And here's what it says. Then they, the enemies of Daniel, they approached and spoke before the king about the king's injunction. They said to the king, did you not sign an injunction that any man who makes a petition to any god or man besides you, O king, for 30 days is to be cast into the lion's den? And the king said, yep, it's exactly what I did. That statement's true. And I did it according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which may not be revoked. We talked about that last week. That in the Medo-Persian law, when a law was made, for no reason could it be altered or abolished. You can't change it. It's written in the law. Now, it says, then they answered and said to the king, well, Daniel, one of the exiles, and by the way, this king loves Daniel. He sees the good in Daniel. He's ready to promote Daniel. He said, Daniel, one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, king. He does not pay any attention to the injunction which you sign. He keeps making his petition 3 times a day. And as soon as the king heard this statement, he's deeply distressed. Now, why is he distressed? Number one, because he knows he's been had. He knows these guys tricked him. And number two, because he loves Daniel. And he knows now he's in a really difficult situation because based on the law, he's got to order Daniel's death. And it says he set his mind on delivering Daniel. Even until sunset, he kept exerting himself to rescue him. So you know what the king did all day long? All day long, he tries to find a loophole. He brings in his advisors. He brings in his lawyers. He tries to find a way around the law, but there is no way around the law. He tries and tries to find a way to set Daniel free. But it says, verse 15, then these men, the enemies of Daniel, came by agreement. They know the king's stalling. He's trying to find a way out. And they said to the king, recognize, O king, that this law is in the law of the Medes and the Persians, which says no injunction, no statute which the king establishes can be changed. So king, quit delaying. It's time for you to order Daniel's death. Now, by the way, when it says that he tried all the way until sunset, that's because in the Medo-Persian law, if someone was found guilty of a capital crime, they had to be executed that very day. So he only had till sunset to try to free him. And he comes up with nothing. Now, before we move on, I want to point out something that has just been really fun to look at in this passage. Let me ask you a question. Why does God give us these exciting stories like Daniel in the lion's den and Jonah and the whale and Noah and the ark? Why does he do it? Every one of these stories, it's the purpose of the entire Old Testament. Every one of these stories has a purpose. And the purpose is to point us to Jesus. And in every one of these stories, you see Jesus. And when you look at the story of Daniel and the lion's den, it is an amazing picture of the story of Jesus and his death, his burial, and his resurrection. Think about it. Daniel was plotted against by his enemies and betrayed. Jesus was plotted against by his enemies and betrayed by one of his disciples. With Daniel, the main judge, King Darius, knew he was innocent. How many times in the Gospels do we see Pontius Pilate declare the innocence of Jesus? In the story of Daniel, the king, the main judge, tries to find ways to release Daniel. That's exactly what Pilate did. Pilate thought, well, if I declare his innocence, they'll let me release him. But that didn't work. He had him scourged, hoping that would satisfy the Jewish crowd. It didn't work. He even gave them the opportunity to choose between Jesus or this horrible criminal named Barabbas to be released. That backfired as well, as the crowd chose Barabbas. In the book of Daniel, the king has to order the execution of Daniel. In the Gospels, Pontius Pilate has to order the death of Jesus, washing his hands, saying, his blood is on you. All through the story, what we see is a picture of Jesus. Let's pick up the story now in verse 16. Then the king gave orders, and Daniel was brought in and cast into the lion's den, and they would probably lower you down with a rope. It was a pit in the ground, and as they're doing that, the king spoke to Daniel and said, your God, whom you constantly serve, will himself deliver you. Now, by the way, in the Aramaic, and this is written in the Aramaic, this is written in a way that's probably more of a question than a statement. I don't think Darius was saying, Daniel, your God will deliver you. I think Darius was saying this, Daniel, will your God deliver you? He's heard a lot about Daniel's God as Daniel has served him. He's not only heard about him, he has watched the way Daniel serves him. Look at the key word. We'll see it twice in the story. He says to Daniel, the God you constantly serve. Now, folks, this is the key to impacting people around you. You cannot just serve God on Sunday. You cannot just serve God at night to shine. You must serve your God constantly, day in and day out. That impacts people. Daniel, will your God that you constantly serve deliver you? Now look what happens next. A stone was brought and laid over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed the stone with his own signet ring and the ring of his nobles so that nothing would be changed. You can't break the seal. Does that sound vaguely familiar to you? Isn't that exactly what they did with Jesus? They put Jesus in the tomb after his crucifixion. They roll a huge stone in front of it, and the stone is sealed with the Roman government so that no one can break the seal. Folks, if all you see in this story is Daniel, you missed the main character, because this is a story pointing us to Jesus. Well, once the stone is put in front of the tomb, the picture now shifts from the den to the palace, and it says, then the king went off to his palace. He spent the night fasting. He couldn't eat. No entertainment was brought to him. No music, no Netflix, no Xbox, nothing. And his sleep fled from him. He couldn't sleep. Now, this is somewhat ironic to think about. The lions were hungry, but couldn't eat. The king could eat, but wasn't hungry. The king in his palace couldn't sleep. Why do I have a feeling that Daniel slept very good that night in the den? Then it says this. Then the king arose at dawn, at the break of day, and went in haste to basically Daniel's tomb. Does that sound familiar to you? I'm telling you, I should have timed this series so this one fell on Easter Sunday. Isn't that what happened the morning of the resurrection? As soon as dawn broke, the women went to the tomb. It's pointing us to Jesus. Well, what happens when he gets there? Verse 20. When the king came near the den to Daniel, he cried out with a troubled voice. Now, that word troubled means this. He's pretty sure in his mind what happened that night. Daniel got killed by the lions. But there's still a little bit of his heart that's hoping, maybe, just maybe, this God that Daniel's told me so much about, maybe, just maybe, he did something. So he's not really expecting to find something, but he's keeping that little bit of hope alive. He's troubled. And it says this. And the king spoke and said to Daniel, Daniel, look what he says, servant of the living God, Has your God, whom you constantly serve, there it is again, constantly serve, been able to deliver you from the lions? I wonder how long Daniel waited to reply. Because if I was Daniel, I would have gave it a few minutes. And what's the first thing Daniel says? You lose, king! No. First thing he says, O king, live forever. My God has sent his angel. He shut the lions' mouths. They have not harmed me, inasmuch as I was found innocent before him and towards you, O king. I've committed no crime. So look at his response. The first thing he says is, O king, live forever. He's saying this to the king who foolishly allowed himself to get tricked into passing this insane law. He's saying this to the king that ordered his execution. And Daniel still responds with respect and grace. Haven't we seen that through the whole series? That's why we've been saying this is about humble courage. This isn't the harsh, mean-spirited courage that we see so often from Christians today, especially in relation to politics. This is a humble courage that says, even when I disagree with you, I will still treat you with respect. When I look at and think back to the time of the height of the pandemic, and I saw the way Christians, even some from this church, the tone of their social media posts, the things that they said, anything but respectful. And we weren't even thrown in a lion's den. But Daniel responds with respect. And I hope we'll remember that in the future. Because if there's one thing I know for sure, there's going to be more laws passed that we don't like. But just because we disagree doesn't mean we have to be disrespectful. O king, live forever. And then Daniel says, my God sent his angel and shut the mouths of the lions, and they have not harmed me. By the way, that angel didn't just shut the mouths. He obviously also did something to the paws, because they didn't attack Daniel with the paws either. Now, there's debate over, like there was with the fiery furnace back a couple of chapters with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Was this any angel, or was this a pre-Bethlehem appearance of Jesus? Because that happens in the Old Testament. And usually he's called the angel of the Lord. Here it says his angel. And some believe this may have actually been Jesus in the lion's den with him. And that's possible. We don't know for sure. I can't say for sure. It's possible. It is interesting to think about, because what's one of the names for Jesus in the Bible? The Lion of Judah. It's kind of cool to think that maybe, just maybe, God sent the Lion of Judah to spend the night shutting the mouths of the lions in the den. But God supernaturally delivers Daniel. Now look at verse 23. Look what happens. The king was very pleased. And he gave orders for Daniel to be taken up out of the den. So they would have put a rope down. Daniel would have tied it around him. They'd have pulled him up. So Daniel was taken up out of the den. No injury whatsoever was found on him. And here's why. Because he had trusted in his God. He trusted in his God. When did he do that? He did that back when the decision was made, I have to obey God and still pray. So I'm going to trust God that if I do what's right, I can accept whatever God does. And because he trusted in God, God gave him courage. Do you need courage today? By the way, listen to this. God doesn't give you courage so that you can be successful. I think one of the problems with the church in America today is our goal is to win. We want to be successful. God doesn't give you courage in order for you to be successful. God gives you courage in order for you to be faithful, even if you lose. Daniel was faithful. Faithful to pray. Faithful to enter the lion's den. Still faithful at the end to say, "O King, live forever." And it says, the king, this is amazing, verse 24. This doesn't sit well with any of us. Unless you're really warped, maybe you like this. The king then gave orders, and they brought those men who maliciously accused Daniel, they cast them into the lion's den. Now that, but you're going, good, they deserve it. But keep reading. And they cast them, their children, and their wives into the lion's den. And it says they had not even reached the bottom of the den. They're lowering down with ropes before the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Don't tell me these lions weren't hungry. So the king has the men who maliciously accused Daniel thrown into the lion's den along with their wives and their children. And we look at that and go, that's horrible. And it is. But folks, that was also part of the Medo-Persian law. Part of the Medo-Persian law said, if you're guilty, not only do you die, but so does your family. That was part of the Medo-Persian law. Now, by the way, that brings up something. If I could chase a rabbit for a second here, that brings up something. Because I've had several people in this series ask me this question. Did Daniel ever marry? Remember, he's taken there to Babylon. He's probably about 15 years old. Did he ever marry? Did he marry another Jewish exile? Did he marry a Babylonian girl? Well, my answer would be I don't think he did. I can't say for sure. I don't think he did for a couple reasons. Number one, when Daniel was thrown into the lion's den, was his wife and children thrown in with him? No. Which tells me at least at that time in his life, he didn't have wife and children. Or they'd have been thrown in with him. That was the law. Now, I think there's something else, and I didn't say this back in chapter 1. When he's first taken to Babylon at 15, he's going to spend his time as an exile serving in the palace. And if you know history, you know what the kings did. If you were a slave or servant that was going to serve in the palace, they made you a eunuch so that you could not fraternize with the king's wives and concubines. And so when you put those pieces together, it would be my belief that Daniel probably never married and certainly never had kids. Just a side note. Well, let's keep reading. Verse 25. Then Darius the king wrote to all the peoples, nations, and men of every language. Just like Nebuchadnezzar did when Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian king, finally figured out who God was. And look what the king says. May your peace abound. I make a decree that in all the dominion of my kingdom, men are to fear and tremble before the God of Daniel. For he, the God of Daniel, is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom is one which will not be destroyed. His dominion will be forever. He delivers and rescues and performs signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, who has also delivered Daniel from the power and mouths of the lions. I think the king is getting it. Look what he says. Here's the decree. The decree states the God of Daniel is the living God. That's huge, folks. Because the Babylonian Empire and the Medo-Persian Empire, they were polytheistic. They worshipped many gods. Many gods. Do you know what the king is saying? Daniel's God is the living God. He is the only living God. All the gods we've been worshiping, they're not even alive. The king's getting it, don't you think? This God, he endures forever. The false gods we're worshiping don't. This God, his kingdom will never be destroyed. Well, the gods of the Babylonian Empire, that kingdom got destroyed. His dominion will be forever. He delivers and rescues. He performs signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He delivered Daniel. I really do believe when we get to heaven, not only will we get to talk with Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, who I believe came to faith in God through Daniel, I believe we're going to get to talk to King Darius, who came to faith in God because of Daniel. Folks, listen. It is humble courage that impacts people spiritually. Harsh courage never will. Harsh courage may make you feel better because you got to vent, but it will never impact people spiritually. Humble courage does. So what happens to Daniel? Verse 28 says, so this Daniel enjoyed success in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. By the way, Cyrus will be the one that will allow the Jews to go back to Jerusalem. And you know why Cyrus made that decision? I think in large part because of the influence of Daniel. Humble courage impacts people. Now let me wrap it up by giving you 5 principles real quick. I won't take much time, just give you 5 principles that I see from the story of Daniel. Number 1, Daniel's bedroom was the real lion's den. That was the real lion's den. Listen to this verse, 1 Peter 5, verse 8. Be of sober spirit. Be on the alert. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring what? Prowls around like a roaring what? Lion. Seeking someone to devour. Folks, listen. I doubt very seriously that you and I will ever get thrown into a literal lion's den. But do you realize you live in a lion's den? Your bedroom is a lion's den. Your living room is a lion's den. Your kitchen is a lion's den. Your office, your factory, your classroom. Because we have an enemy who roams around like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour. And we said last Sunday that the only way you will be able to courageously face the lion's den tomorrow is if you develop your prayer life today. Principle number 2. Daniel lived a consistent life of courageous commitment. He was 15, probably, when he was taken to Babylon. It wasn't a blip on the screen. He was there the entire rest of his life. In his 80s, he's thrown into a lion's den. But he stayed faithful the whole way. Daniel lived a consistent life in spite of bad circumstances. He never got to go home from 15 into his 80s. He was in Babylon, away from his family, away from his land the entire time, but he stayed faithful. Number 4, Daniel was respectful and obedient to his governmental leaders, with the only exception being when it went directly against the law of God. That's the only time he would not obey them, but even then he was respectful. Let's remember that. Let's remember that. Let's not let our emotions and our zeal and our fear get the best of us. And then we'll end with this one. Daniel was a vehicle for God to get glory. Matthew 5 says this: let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. That happened in the life of Daniel. Nebuchadnezzar saw his good works and ultimately put his faith in God. Darius saw Daniel's good works and ultimately put his faith in God. And my friend, in the culture we live in, if you and I will live a humble, courageous life, people will see our good works and they will glorify our God in heaven. Well, before the broadcast ends, while I still have all of you, I want to encourage you all to do something at all of our campuses. Online, the Sioux, down at the chapel, here, everywhere, everyone who's watching. We are putting together, we did this last year, it was great. It's a 40-day spiritual growth emphasis. We're starting 2 weeks from today. If you sign up for it, you are going to get a daily email devotional written by someone in our church for 40 days. It'll start February 26th and go through Easter. And they're all geared to helping you focus and take steps on our 6 catalysts for spiritual growth. And we would love for you to participate. Now you have to sign up. It's free. It's a daily email for 40 days from February 26th through Easter. You just need to right now take out your phone. Go ahead. You have my permission. Take out your phone real quick. Check your messages. And then I want you to text the word GROW, G-R-O-W, to this phone number. 989-623-4779. Right now. Do it right now. Text the word GROW to 989-623-4779. And you're going to get a link. All you have to do is follow that link, fill out the little form so we have your email address. You're all set. Beginning February 26th, all the way to Easter. Easter will be the last one. You'll get a daily email devotional helping you to focus on the 6 catalysts to spiritual growth. They're all written by people within our ministry. And this was fabulous last year. So again, text the word GROW to 989-623-4779. And then next week, we're going to start a new series through Psalm 77 that I'm calling Frustrated at God. Have you ever been frustrated at God? What do you do when you're frustrated at God? That's what we're going to see. All right, I'm going to toss it to Jeff right now up at our Sault Ste. Marie campus, to Kevin down in the chapel at our classic service. Here in the main auditorium, would you stand with me? And from home, what we want to do now is we want to end our service by worshiping this God. Now again, I hope if you're a first-time guest, you'll bring your ticket out to me. I'd love to meet you in the hub. But let's end our service by understanding that we serve a God who is the same yesterday, today, and forever. His character does not change, which means we can trust who He is. And when we trust who He is, we will accept what He does. Let's worship.